Today, I've prepared the biography of Thomas Edison. Before you fall asleep, make sure to tell us from where you're listening and what time it is. Now, calm down and listen to the story while falling asleep. I'm wishing you a cozy and comfortable night. As you settle deeper into your pillow, let your breathing slow and your thoughts grow quiet. Tonight, we'll drift through the remarkable life of Thomas Edison, the Wizard of Menlo Park, whose inventions illuminate our world to this day. His story begins in the gentle quiet of a small Ohio town, much like the peaceful quiet that's beginning to surround you now. Let his journey of curiosity and perseverance carry you softly into your dreams. The warm glow of his most famous invention, the light bulb, will guide our tale as your eyelids grow heavier with each passing moment. In the quiet village of Milan, Ohio, as winter's gentle hold began to soften into the earliest whispers of spring, a child was born who would one day illuminate the world. It was February 11, 1847, when Thomas Alva Edison drew his first breath in a modest home on the banks of the Huron River. The world outside was still largely lit by candlelight and oil lamps, unaware that this newborn would someday transform darkness into light with inventions beyond imagination. Thomas was the seventh and youngest child of Samuel and Nancy Edison. His father, Samuel, was a man of many trades, a shingle maker, a land speculator, and later a shopkeeper who sold grain and feed. Samuel had fled to Canada after participating in the Mackenzie Rebellion in Ontario, eventually making his way to Ohio, where he would meet Nancy. Thomas's mother, Nancy Matthews Elliott Edison, was a former schoolteacher, a woman of intellect and warmth who would become the most profound influence in young Thomas's early life. The Edison household was one of modest means, but rich in curiosity and learning. The family lived in a simple white frame house where the sounds of the nearby river provided a constant, soothing backdrop to daily life. In those days, Milan was a bustling canal town where boats laden with grain and other goods would pass through on their journey to Lake Erie. Young Thomas would often wander to the canal, watching with wide-eyed fascination as the boats moved through the locks, his mind already beginning to wonder about the mechanics of the world around him. When Thomas was just 7 years old, the family moved to Port Huron, Michigan, a decision prompted by the declining fortunes of Milan as railroads began to replace canals as the preferred means of transportation. The journey to their new home was made by steamboat across Lake Erie, an adventure that must have filled the young boy with wonder and excitement. Port Huron, situated at the southern end of Lake Huron, where it meets the St. Clair River, would be the backdrop for Thomas's formative years. The new Edison home was a large, comfortable house on 6th Street, with enough space for the family to spread out. Port Huron in the 1850s was a growing community, with ships constantly passing through the busy harbor, connecting the Great Lakes expanding American frontier for a curious child like Thomas. It was a place filled with endless opportunities for observation and learning. Thomas's formal education was brief, and by most accounts, unremarkable. He attended school for only a few months, where his restless mind and questioning nature were often at odds with the rote learning methods of the time. His teacher reportedly considered him addled or slow, a misunderstanding that wounded the sensitive boy deeply. When Nancy Edison learned of this assessment, she promptly removed her son from school, deciding instead to educate him at home. This decision would prove to be a turning point in young Thomas's life. Nancy, drawing upon her experience as a teacher, provided her son with a rich and varied education. She read to him from works of literature, history, and science, encouraging his natural curiosity and love of learning. Under her patient guidance, Thomas developed a voracious appetite for knowledge, often reading books far beyond his years. G. Parker's Natural and Experimental Philosophy, which introduced him to the scientific method and basic principles of physics. The mid-19th century was a time of significant change in America. The country was expanding westward. Industrialization was beginning to transform the economy, and new technologies were emerging that would forever alter daily life. In this atmosphere of progress and possibility, young Thomas's imagination flourished, and Thomas's entrepreneurial spirit emerged early. At the age of 12, he convinced his parents to let him sell newspapers and snacks on the Grand Trunk Railroad that ran between Port Huron and Detroit. This was no small undertaking for a boy his age, requiring him to board a train before dawn and return late in the evening. But Thomas embraced the opportunity with characteristic enthusiasm. He would buy newspapers wholesale in Detroit and sell them at a markup to passengers eager for news as they traveled. The railroad provided more than just a source of income for the young entrepreneur. It was a classroom of sorts, where Thomas observed the workings of the steam engines that powered the trains, listened to the telegraph operators sending messages along the line, and engaged in conversations with a diverse array of travelers. The rhythmic clacking of the train wheels on the tracks, the hiss of steam, and the distant whistle became the soundtrack of his adolescence, a gentle, constant reminder of the mechanical world he was beginning to understand. It was during this period that Thomas experienced an event that would profoundly affect his life. While selling his newspapers, he saved the life of a station agent's young son who had fallen onto the tracks in front of an oncoming train. Hugh Mackenzie taught Thomas how to operate the telegraph, a skill that would open new doors for the inquisitive teenager. The telegraph, with its dots and dashes, conveying messages across vast distances, captivated Thomas's imagination. Here was a practical application of electricity, a mysterious force that would become the focus of much of his later work. Thomas's hearing began to deteriorate around this time, possibly due to a childhood bout of scarlet fever, or, as some accounts suggest, an incident where a conductor boxed his ears after he accidentally set fire to the baggage car with one of his chemical experiments. Whatever the cause, his partial deafness would be a constant companion throughout his life. Yet, rather than viewing it as a handicap, Thomas often spoke of it as an advantage, allowing him to concentrate deeply without distraction. The Civil War cast its long shadow over America during Thomas's teenage years. While he was too young to enlist, the conflict affected him in various ways. Paper shortages meant his newspaper business sometimes struggled, and the telegraph became increasingly important for transmitting news from the battlefields. Thomas followed the progress of the war through the newspapers he sold, developing a keen interest in current events and politics that would stay with him throughout his life. By the age of 15, Thomas had become proficient enough as a telegraph operator to secure a job as a replacement for an operator who had left to fight in the war. This marked the beginning of a period of wandering for the young man, as he traveled from city to city across the Midwest, working as a telegrapher. These years were filled with new experiences and observations, as Thomas moved through Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Louisville, and other growing American cities. The life of a telegrapher in the 1860s was one of both routine and responsibility. Thomas would sit for hours, transcribing messages that ranged from personal greetings to critical business transactions and news reports. The work required concentration, accuracy, and speed, all qualities that would serve him well in his later inventive career. During the quiet night shifts, Thomas would read voraciously, continuing the self-education his mother had begun. It was also during these wandering years that Thomas began to experiment with improving the telegraph equipment he used daily. He developed a repeating device that could send automatic telegraph signals, an early indication of his inventive genius. His colleagues often found him tinkering with the equipment, always seeking ways to make it work more efficiently. In 1868, at the age of 21, Thomas moved to Boston, where he worked as an operator for Western Union. Boston was a center of scientific and technological innovation, and Thomas absorbed the intellectual atmosphere of the city like a sponge. He attended lectures at the Boston Tech, which would later become the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, visited the Boston Public Library, and began to more seriously pursue his own inventions. His first patented invention, an electronic vote recorder, was designed to allow legislators to cast their votes more quickly. Although technically sound, the device was rejected by politicians who preferred the slower voting method that allowed time for lobbying and persuasion. This early disappointment taught Thomas a valuable lesson about the importance of market demand in successful invention. a principle he would apply throughout his career. Thomas's early life was shaped not only by his experiences and observations, but also by the broader context of American society. During the mid-19th century, he came of age during a time of tremendous change and opportunity. The Industrial Revolution was transforming the American landscape, with factories, railroads, and new technologies altering traditional ways of life. The aftermath of the Civil War brought both challenges and possibilities as the nation sought to rebuild and reunite. In this environment, a self-taught young man with mechanical aptitude and entrepreneurial spirit could find opportunities that might not have existed in earlier times or more rigid societies. Thomas's background, neither privileged nor impoverished, placed him in a position to observe both the working class and the emerging industrial elite. His father's various business ventures, though not always successful, provided Thomas with early exposure to commerce and enterprise. The Edison family home in Port Huron was a place of warmth and intellectual stimulation. Nancy Edison continued to encourage her son's curiosity and learning, even as his experiments sometimes led to mishaps. There was the time young Thomas accidentally set fire to a barn, and another incident where chemicals from his basement laboratory created noxious fumes that permeated the house. Through it all, his mother's belief in his potential remained unwavering. Thomas's relationship with his father was more complex. Samuel Edison, practical and sometimes stern, did not always understand his son's obsession with experiments and inventions, yet he provided Thomas with an example of perseverance and adaptability, qualities that would serve the inventor well throughout his life. Despite occasional tensions, there was a fundamental respect between father and son that deepened as Thomas began to achieve success. The gentle rhythms of life in Port Huron, the changing of the seasons, the comings and goings of ships in the harbor, the gradual introduction of new technologies into everyday life, formed the backdrop against which Thomas's character developed. The natural world provided both inspiration and materials for his experiments. He collected specimens, observed natural phenomena, and developed the habit of careful observation that would later be central to his work as an inventor. As Thomas's telegraphy career advanced, he began to save money to pursue his inventions more seriously. His wandering years had given him a broad perspective on American life and technology, exposing him to different working environments and a wide range of people. He had learned to be self-reliant, adaptable, and resourceful qualities that would serve him well in the challenging path of innovation that lay ahead. By the time Thomas Edison left Boston in 1869, moving to New York City to seek greater opportunities, he had already begun to establish himself as more than just a telegrapher. He was becoming an inventor, a problem solver, a young man with vision and determination. The foundations laid in his childhood and youth, his mother's encouragement, his practical experience on the railroad and with the telegraph, his self-directed reading and experimentation, had prepared him for the remarkable journey that would follow. The quiet child from Milan, Ohio, who had once been labeled addled by his teacher, was on the cusp of becoming one of the most prolific inventors in human history. The world that had been illuminated by candles and oil lamps when he was born would, through his genius and persistence, soon be transformed by the steady, unwavering glow of the electric light. But that brilliant future was still to come. As the young Thomas Edison made his way to New York City, carrying with him the dreams, experiences, and lessons of his early years, let us drift further into the story as we explore the next part of this fascinating journey. As Thomas's telegraphy career advanced, he began to save money to pursue his inventions more seriously. His wandering years had given him a broad perspective on American life and technology, exposing him to different working environments and a wide range of people. He had learned to be self-reliant, adaptable, and resourceful qualities that would serve him well in the challenging path of innovation that lay ahead. The formal education of Thomas Edison was remarkably brief, a gentle whisper in the long, soft story of his intellectual development. His time in a traditional classroom lasted only about 3 months, a fleeting moment in the winter landscape of his childhood. The schoolmaster, finding young Thomas to be restless and full of questions, suggested to his mother Nancy that perhaps the boy's mind was not suited for conventional learning. In the gentle amber light of their modest home, Nancy Edison made a decision that would shape the course of her son's life, and in time, the very texture of modern existence. She would teach him herself in the tranquil hours of their days together. Nancy introduced Thomas to the written word, guiding his curious fingers across the pages of books that opened like windows onto distant worlds. She read to him in a soothing voice that carried him through stories and ideas, nurturing in him a love of language and knowledge that would sustain him throughout his life. The soft rustle of turning pages became a familiar comfort, a sound that promised new discoveries. Nancy, who had once been a schoolteacher herself, understood the delicate art of awakening a child's natural curiosity. She did not force learning upon him, but rather allowed his questions to lead the way, like a stream finding its natural course through a meadow. When Thomas asked why the sky was blue or how birds could fly, she would help him seek the answers, teaching him that knowledge was not something to be passively received, but actively pursued. By the age of 12, Thomas had developed a particular fondness for science. G. Parker's School of Natural Philosophy, a gentle introduction to the principles of physics, and Thomas devoured it with the quiet intensity that would become his hallmark. The book explained the fundamental forces of nature in clear, accessible language, and Thomas found himself drawn especially to the descriptions of electricity, that mysterious force that seemed to dance at the edge of human understanding. The family's modest home library grew as Thomas's father, Samuel, recognized his son's thirst for knowledge and brought home books whenever he could. In the soft glow of lamplight, Thomas would lose himself in these volumes, his mind drifting through realms of chemistry, physics, and mechanics. He read not just for pleasure, but with purpose, his young mind already beginning to see connections between ideas, possibilities that others might miss. When Thomas was 12, a pivotal moment in his education arrived in the form of a small printing press, a gift from his father, named after the railroad where his father worked. This modest publication contained news, advertisements, and announcements that Thomas gathered from passengers and railroad employees. The soft thump of the press became a rhythmic backdrop to his days as he taught himself the patient craft of typesetting and editing. The railroad itself became an extension of Thomas's classroom. The long, rocking journeys between stations gave him time to read and think, while the stops offered opportunities to gather news and sell his papers. The gentle sway of the train cars seemed to match the cadence of his thoughts, a soothing rhythm that allowed his mind to wander and wonder. The passengers, with their diverse backgrounds and experiences, became unwitting teachers, sharing stories and knowledge that expanded Thomas's understanding of the world. A particularly significant figure in Thomas's early intellectual development was James U. Mackenzie, a station agent at Mount Clemens, who took an interest in the bright young newspaper seller. Mackenzie taught Thomas the basics of telegraphy, introducing him to the dots and dashes of Morse code that would become as familiar to him as the alphabet in the quiet tapping of the telegraph key. Thomas found a new language, a way of communicating that seemed almost magical in its ability to transcend distance. The chemistry experiments that Thomas conducted in a makeshift laboratory on the train might have remained a private pursuit had it not been for a fortunate incident that unfolded like a dream on a summer day. U. Mackenzie from being struck by a runaway train, the grateful father offered to teach Thomas the art of telegraphy. In the gentle hours of evening, after the bustle of the day had subsided, Mackenzie guided Thomas through the rhythmic language of dots and dashes, a code that would become as natural to him as breathing. As Thomas mastered telegraphy, he found himself drawn into a community of operators who shared a common language and purpose. These men, scattered across the vast network of telegraph offices, became his colleagues, and in some cases, his mentors. The soft clicking of telegraph keys formed a background melody to their conversations, as they shared not only messages, but also knowledge, techniques, and ideas. One such mentor was Franklin Leonard Pope, a telegraph engineer who welcomed Thomas into his home in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and provided him with space to work on his inventions. In the peaceful evenings after work, Pope would share his extensive knowledge of electrical engineering with Thomas, discussing theories and possibilities in conversations that often stretched into the early hours of morning. The gentle glow of oil lamps illuminated these discussions, casting soft shadows on the walls as ideas took shape between them. Thomas's time with Pope was a period of gentle but significant growth, living and working alongside an established inventor gave him insights into the practical aspects of developing and patenting new technologies. Pope's methodical approach to problem solving influenced Thomas's own methods, teaching him the value of careful documentation and systematic experimentation. In the quiet of Pope's workshop, Thomas began to develop the disciplined approach to invention that would later become his signature. Another influential figure in Thomas's intellectual development was Benjamin Bredding, a telegrapher and electrician whose technical knowledge complemented Thomas's intuitive understanding of electrical systems. Bredding introduced Thomas to the more formal aspects of electrical theory, guiding him through the mathematical principles that underlay the practical applications they both loved. Their conversations had a gentle rhythm, moving back and forth between abstract concepts and concrete examples, theory and practice intertwining like threads in a tapestry. The telegraph offices where Thomas worked during his wandering years became informal classrooms, places where knowledge was shared and skills were honed. In the quiet hours of night shifts, when traffic was slow, operators would discuss new techniques, share books, and sometimes conduct impromptu experiments with the equipment at hand. The soft hum of telegraph wires formed a soothing backdrop to these explorations, a constant reminder of the invisible forces they were learning to harness. Thomas's time in Boston proved particularly valuable for his intellectual development. The city, with its rich cultural and scientific life, offered resources that he had not encountered before. He visited the Boston Public Library, wandering through its hushed halls and running his fingers along the spines of books that contained knowledge from across the centuries. In the gentle stillness of the reading room, he absorbed information on electricity, chemistry, and mechanics, filling notebooks with ideas and questions that would later guide his research. While in Boston, Thomas also attended lectures at the Boston Tech, which would later become the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Though not enrolled as a formal student, he slipped quietly into the back of lecture halls, listening intently as professors explained principles of physics and engineering. The soft murmur of scholarly discourse washed over him like a gentle wave, carrying with it insights and inspirations that he carefully gathered and stored away. It was during this period that Thomas began to develop a more systematic approach to invention. He started keeping detailed notebooks, recording not only his successful experiments, but also his failures, understanding that each unsuccessful attempt contained valuable lessons. In the soft light of his rented room, he would write late into the night, his pencil moving steadily across the page as he documented observations and ideas. These notebooks, filled with his neat, precise handwriting, became the foundation of his life's work. Thomas's first patented invention, an electronic vote recorder designed to speed up the legislative process, emerged from this period of intensive self-education. Though the device was technically successful, it found no market among legislators who, as Thomas discovered, had little interest in speeding up the voting process. This gentle disappointment taught him an important lesson about the relationship between invention and practical need, a lesson he would carry with him throughout his career. Rather than being discouraged by this setback, Thomas adjusted his approach. He decided that henceforth he would only invent things that people wanted to buy. This pragmatic shift in thinking, this alignment of innovation with market demand, would become a defining characteristic of his approach to invention. In the quiet evolution of his methods, we can see the formation of a philosophy that would eventually transform him from a curious experimenter into a successful inventor and businessman. Rather than relying solely on books or formal instruction, he learned by doing, by taking things apart and putting them back together, by testing ideas through careful experimentation. The gentle ticking of clocks often accompanied these explorations, marking the passage of hours that Thomas barely noticed as he lost himself in the flow of discovery. His approach to learning was not hurried or forced, but patient and persistent. He understood that knowledge, like the growth of a tree, could not be rushed, but required time and nurturing. When faced with a problem or question, he would approach it from multiple angles, trying different solutions until he found one that worked. This methodical persistence, this willingness to try and try again, became one of his greatest intellectual strengths. Thomas's intellectual development was also shaped by his growing network of professional connections. As he established himself in the field of telegraphy, he came into contact with investors, engineers, and scientists who recognized his potential and shared their knowledge with him. These relationships formed a web of support and stimulation, a community of minds that challenged and encouraged him. The gentle exchange of ideas within this network provided Thomas with perspectives and insights that broadened his thinking and refined his approach. By the time Thomas established his first small laboratory in Newark, New Jersey, in 1871, he had developed a distinctive approach to invention that combined intuitive understanding with methodical experimentation. He had learned to trust his instincts while also respecting the need for careful testing and documentation. In the quiet order of his laboratory, with its neatly arranged tools and materials, we can see the reflection of a mind that had found its own way of working, its own path to knowledge. the gentle unfolding of Thomas Edison's intellectual development from curious child to self-taught inventor reminds us that education takes many forms. His story invites us to consider the value of self-direction, of following one's curiosity wherever it might lead. In the soft glow of his achievements, we can see the power of a mind that never stopped questioning, never stopped seeking, never stopped imagining what might be possible. As sleep begins to embrace us, let us carry with us the image of young Thomas, bent over a book in the warm light of a lamp, his mind reaching out to grasp ideas that would one day change the world. In that quiet moment of learning, in that peaceful pursuit of knowledge, lies the heart of his genius. A genius not of sudden inspiration, but of patient, persistent inquiry. And in that gentle persistence, perhaps, lies a lesson for us all. The peaceful narrative of this life continues as we turn our attention to what happened next. The gentle unfolding of Thomas Edison's professional journey began in the most humble of circumstances, as many great stories often do. After years of self-education and curious exploration, Thomas found himself working as a telegraph operator, a position that would prove pivotal in shaping his future endeavors. The soft clicking of telegraph keys became the rhythm of his early working life, a soothing backdrop to his developing mind. In those quiet hours of the night shift, when the world around him slept, Edison would often find moments to read, to think, and to dream of possibilities that others had yet to imagine. By the time Thomas established his first small laboratory in Newark, New Jersey, in 1871, he had developed a distinctive approach to invention that combined intuitive understanding with methodical experimentation. He had learned to trust his instincts while also respecting the need for careful testing and documentation. In the quiet order of his laboratory, with its neatly arranged tools and materials, we can see the reflection of a mind that had found its own way of working, its own path to knowledge. Edison's Newark laboratory became a sanctuary of creativity, a place where ideas could breathe and grow. The soft golden light of oil lamps would illuminate his workspace long into the night, casting gentle shadows on walls that witnessed the birth of numerous inventions. The air carried the mild scent of wood, metal, and the occasional whiff of chemicals, all combining into what Edison might have considered the perfume of progress. His fingers, slightly calloused from years of hands-on work, would move deliberately from one component to another, assembling, disassembling, and reassembling, until the creation matched the vision in his mind. In those early Newark days, Edison focused much of his attention on improving telegraph technology, the field he knew most intimately. The telegraph, though revolutionary, was still in its adolescence as a technology, with much room for refinement and enhancement. Edison saw these limitations not as obstacles, but as invitations, gentle whispers of possibility that called to his inventive spirit. His first patented invention, the electric vote recorder, though not commercially successful, demonstrated his ability to identify problems and craft innovative solutions. The rhythm of Edison's early career was unhurried yet purposeful, like the steady flow of a river that knows its destination, but is not anxious about arrival. In 1869, he patented his first commercially successful invention, an improved stock ticker called the Universal Stock Printer. This device brought more accurate and reliable information to the financial markets, creating a smooth flow of data where once there had been confusion and delay. For this invention, the Gold and Stock Telegraph Company paid Edison the sum of $40,000, a considerable amount at that time, equivalent to nearly $1 million today. This financial windfall arrived like a gentle rain after a drought, nourishing Edison's ability to pursue his inventive dreams with greater freedom. With these funds, he established a small manufacturing facility in Newark, where he began to produce stock tickers and other telegraphic devices. The soft whirring of machinery and the quiet concentration of his small team of workers created an atmosphere of peaceful productivity, a harmony of human ingenuity and mechanical precision. Edison's approach to managing his early business ventures revealed much about his character. Unlike some industrialists of the era who ruled with iron fists, Edison created a more collaborative environment. He understood that innovation thrives in spaces where ideas can be shared freely, where questions are welcomed rather than discouraged. His employees, many of whom would remain with him for decades, worked not out of fear, but out of respect and shared purpose. The gentle hum of conversation that filled his workshop was the sound of minds working together, building upon each other's insights in a continuous flow of creativity. The historical context of Edison's early career provides a soothing backdrop to understand the significance of his work. America in the 1870s was a nation still healing from the wounds of civil war, seeking to rebuild and reimagine itself. The Industrial Revolution was transforming the landscape, both literally and figuratively, as steam power and mechanization changed how people lived and worked. Communication technologies were particularly important in this era of expansion, as they helped bind together a vast and growing nation. Edison's improvements to the telegraph came at a time when businesses and individuals alike were hungry for faster, more reliable ways to connect across distances. During these formative professional years, Edison developed relationships that would prove instrumental to his future success. One such connection was with Franklin Pope, a telegraph engineer with whom Edison briefly partnered. Their collaboration, though not long-lasting, provided Edison with valuable insights into the business side of invention. The gentle exchange of ideas between these two minds, each with their own strengths and perspectives, enriched Edison's understanding of how to bring innovations from concept to market. Another significant relationship was with Edison's first wife, Mary Stilwell, whom he married in 1871. Mary, who had worked in one of his shops, provided a domestic haven for the inventor, a quiet space where his mind could rest and rejuvenate. Their home became a sanctuary from the demands of his growing business, a place where Edison could find the peaceful repose necessary for creative thinking. Though their marriage would face challenges, in these early years, Mary's presence offered Edison the emotional stability that supported his professional endeavors. As we drift deeper into our exploration of Edison's early career, we find him facing numerous challenges with quiet determination. Financial difficulties would sometimes visit his doorstep, like unwelcome guests arriving without warning. The economic panic of 1873, which triggered a lengthy depression in the American economy, created ripples that reached even Edison's growing enterprise. Orders slowed, payments were delayed, and the future seemed temporarily shrouded in uncertainty. Yet, Edison met these challenges with the same methodical approach he applied to his inventions. He would sit quietly in his laboratory, sometimes late into the night, reviewing his financial ledgers by the soft glow of lamplight. With patient deliberation, he would consider options, adjust plans, and find ways to continue his work despite economic headwinds. This resilience, this gentle persistence in the face of obstacles, became one of Edison's defining characteristics. Technical challenges, too, were constant companions on Edison's inventive journey. Each new device, each improvement to existing technology, presented puzzles to be solved. Sometimes, a solution would evade him for weeks or months. Like a shy animal hiding in the underbrush, Edison would pursue these solutions with unhurried determination, knowing that often the answer would come not in a moment of frantic searching, but in a moment of quiet contemplation. By 1874, Edison had begun to shift his focus somewhat, moving beyond telegraph technology to explore other electrical innovations. His mind, always seeking new territories to explore, turned to the possibility of sending multiple messages simultaneously over a single telegraph wire, a technology known as quadruplex telegraphy. This innovation would allow telegraph companies to transmit 4 separate messages over one wire, 2 in each direction, significantly increasing capacity without the expense of laying new lines. The development of quadruplex telegraphy was not a straight path, but rather a meandering journey with detours and pauses along the way. Edison would work on the problem for hours, then set it aside to allow his subconscious mind to continue the work while he attended to other matters. Sometimes insights would come to him in those drowsy moments between wakefulness and sleep, when the mind is most receptive to gentle whispers of inspiration. The successful completion of the quadruplex telegraph in 1874 marked a significant milestone in Edison's career. Western Union, recognizing the value of this innovation, purchased the rights for the substantial sum of $10,000. This transaction not only provided Edison with additional financial resources, but also solidified his reputation as an inventor of practical, commercially valuable technologies. The quiet satisfaction he must have felt, knowing his creation would improve communication across the nation, surely provided motivation for his continued work. During this period, Edison also began experimenting with acoustic telegraphy, which would eventually lead him toward the phonograph. These experiments reveal the interconnected nature of innovation, how one line of inquiry often opens doors to unexpected possibilities. Edison's mind moved like a gentle breeze through fields of knowledge, picking up seeds of ideas and carrying them to new ground where they could take root and flourish. By 1876, Edison had outgrown his Newark laboratory and sought a more spacious environment for his expanding vision. He established a new laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, a facility that would become known as the world's first industrial research laboratory. This transition marked the beginning of a new chapter in Edison's career, one in which his approach to invention would become more systematic, and his ambitions would grow to encompass lighting, sound recording, and eventually motion pictures. The Menlo Park Laboratory was designed to be a place of both order and inspiration. Large windows allowed natural light to fill the spaces during daylight hours, creating an atmosphere conducive to careful observation and detailed work. The layout of the facility encouraged both focused individual effort and collaborative problem-solving. Edison carefully selected the equipment and materials that filled the laboratory, ensuring that his team would have the resources needed to pursue a wide range of investigations. The team Edison assembled at Menlo Park represented another important aspect of his approach to invention. He recognized that no single person, not even someone with his remarkable intellect and energy, could possess all the knowledge and skills needed for the ambitious projects he envisioned. With careful consideration, he brought together individuals with complementary abilities: mathematicians, chemists, mechanics, and others whose expertise could contribute to the collective effort. Among these early collaborators was Charles Batchelor, a British mechanic whose precision and attention to detail perfectly complemented Edison's more intuitive approach. Their working relationship, built on mutual respect and shared purpose, exemplified the collaborative spirit that Edison fostered. In the quiet hours of experimentation, Batchelor's meticulous notes and careful observations provided the solid foundation upon which Edison's creative leaps could safely land. The move to Menlo Park coincided with Edison's growing interest in the telephone, recently invented by Alexander Graham Bell. Edison saw opportunities to improve this new technology, particularly in the transmitter component, with characteristic patience. He explored various approaches to creating a more effective transmitter, eventually developing the carbon button transmitter, an innovation that significantly improved the clarity and volume of telephone conversations. This period of Edison's career illustrates an important aspect of his genius: his ability to build upon and improve the innovations of others. Rather than seeing Bell's telephone as a completed invention, Edison perceived it as a work in progress, a technology still in need of refinement. This perspective, this gentle recognition that most innovations emerge not fully formed, but through gradual improvement, informed much of Edison's work throughout his career. As our thoughts continue to drift through the landscape of Edison's early professional life, we find ourselves in 1877, the year Edison invented the phonograph. This remarkable device, which could record and reproduce sound, emerged somewhat unexpectedly from his work on telegraph and telephone improvements. The soft wonder of hearing a human voice emanating from a machine for the first time must have been truly magical, even to Edison himself, who understood the scientific principles involved. Newspapers across the country reported on this seemingly miraculous invention, and Edison was invited to demonstrate it at the White House for President Rutherford B. Hayes. Yet amid this sudden celebrity, Edison maintained his focus and his methodical approach to invention. Fame was not his goal. It was merely a byproduct of his relentless pursuit of useful innovation. As we near the end of our exploration of Edison's early career, we find him standing at the threshold of what would become, perhaps, his most famous achievement: the development of a practical electric light system. By 1878, Edison had turned his attention to this challenge, recognizing both its technical difficulty and its potential to transform how people lived. The soft glow of electric light would eventually replace the flickering flames of gas lamps and candles, creating safer, cleaner illumination for homes and businesses alike. The path to a practical electric light would not be easy or straight. It would require thousands of experiments, numerous setbacks, and the collaborative efforts of Edison's entire team. But the foundation for this success had been laid in those early years, in the telegraph offices, where young Thomas first learned about electricity, in the Newark workshop, where he developed his approach to invention, and in the relationships he built with collaborators who shared his vision. As sleep gently beckons, we can imagine Edison in his Menlo Park laboratory, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the team he had assembled. The soft scratching of pencils on paper, the quiet conversations about possibilities and problems, the patient testing and retesting of ideas. These were the sounds and rhythms of creation. In this peaceful environment of focused purpose, Innovations that would change the world were taking shape, emerging not in dramatic moments of inspiration, but through the gentle, persistent application of curiosity, knowledge, and determination. Edison's early career teaches us that great achievements often come not from dramatic leaps, but from patient steps, not from solitary genius, but from collaborative effort, not from rigid adherence to convention, but from the courage to explore new paths. As we drift into slumber, may we carry with us the quiet wisdom of Edison's approach, the value of persistence, the importance of practical application, and the power of believing that solutions can be found if we only have the patience to look for them. As you relax deeper, let us now softly explore the next chapter of this soothing biography. The path to a practical electric light would not be easy or straight. It would require thousands of experiments, numerous setbacks, and the collaborative efforts of Edison's entire team. But the foundation for this success had been laid in those early years, in the telegraph offices, where young Thomas first learned about electricity, in the Newark workshop, where he developed his approach to invention, and in the relationships he built with collaborators who shared his vision. As the gentle evening shadows grew longer at Menlo Park, Thomas Edison would often remain in his laboratory, a soft glow of gas lamps illuminating his workspace as he pursued what many considered impossible: a practical electric light for everyday homes. The year was 1878, and Edison had already established himself as an inventor of note. But the challenge before him now was perhaps his most daunting. Previous attempts at electric lighting had produced only brief, brilliant flashes or impractical arcs of light too harsh and dangerous for home use. Edison, however, approached the problem with his characteristic patience and methodical nature. In the quiet of his laboratory, Edison would often sit contemplating the nature of electricity itself, watching the way it moved through various materials, observing its behavior with the careful attention of someone who understood that nature reveals her secrets slowly to those willing to listen. His breath would create small clouds in the cool night air as he worked through the winter months, testing one material after another for the perfect filament that would glow without quickly burning away. Edison's process was one of gentle persistence. He would try a material, perhaps a thin strip of platinum, or later, a delicate thread of carbonized bamboo. Place it carefully in a glass bulb from which the air had been removed, and then connect it to his electrical source. Sometimes the material would glow briefly before failing. Other times it would not light at all. Each attempt was carefully recorded in notebooks that filled shelf after shelf, the pages turning softly under his fingers as he reviewed previous experiments, looking for patterns, for clues, for the whispered hints that would guide him forward. The Menlo Park laboratory itself was a place of quiet innovation. Unlike the chaotic, solitary workspace one might imagine, Edison had created something new, a collaborative research facility where specialists in various fields worked together, sharing insights, building upon each other's discoveries, the gentle murmur of voices discussing glass-blowing techniques, electrical resistance, or vacuum pumps created a soothing background to the work at hand. Edison understood that innovation flourished in this atmosphere of shared purpose and complementary skills. As days turned to weeks and weeks to months, Edison and his team tested hundreds, then thousands of materials. Each failure was met not with frustration, but with the calm acceptance that they had simply found another way that would not work. This peaceful persistence, this unhurried determination, was perhaps Edison's greatest strength. The ability to continue moving forward without being disturbed by setbacks. The search for the perfect filament took them around the world, at least in spirit. They tested fibers from plants, from distant continents, delicate threads of metals, carbonized versions of everything from cotton thread to fishing line. Each material was carefully prepared, shaped, and tested in the quiet of the laboratory, where the only sounds might be the gentle hiss of the vacuum pump, the soft click of electrical connections being made, or the occasional whispered observation. It was in October of 1879 that Edison's team finally achieved a breakthrough with a carbonized cotton thread that glowed for nearly 14 hours before burning out. The soft, warm light it produced was nothing like the harsh glare of arc lamps or the brief, brilliant flash of earlier experiments. Instead, it was a gentle illumination that one could imagine in a family home, casting its golden glow over evening activities, extending the productive hours beyond sunset without the dangers of gas lighting or the inconvenience of oil lamps. This success, however, was just the beginning of a longer journey. Edison knew that 14 hours was not enough for a truly practical light bulb. With the same unhurried patience that had characterized his earlier work, he continued searching for better filament materials. The laboratory continued its gentle rhythm of experimentation, observation, and refinement. Eventually, they discovered that Japanese bamboo, properly carbonized, could last for over 1,200 hours, a remarkable achievement that made electric lighting truly practical for the first time. But Edison's vision extended far beyond the light bulb itself. With the same methodical approach, he set about designing an entire system for delivering electricity to homes and businesses. In the peaceful evening hours, he would sketch out plans for generators, distribution networks, meters, and safety devices. Each component was considered not in isolation, but as part of a harmonious whole, a complete system that would bring the benefits of electric light to ordinary people. In 1882, Edison's Pearl Street station began providing electricity to 59 customers in Lower Manhattan. The generators hummed with a soothing consistency, converting mechanical energy to electrical current that flowed through carefully insulated wires to businesses and homes nearby. The soft glow of electric lights began to replace the flickering flames of gas lamps, changing not just how people saw at night, but how they lived and worked. The path to the electric light was emblematic of Edison's approach to all his inventions. The phonograph, perhaps his most original creation, came about through the same patient observation and experimentation. In the quiet of his workshop, Edison had noticed that the vibration of a telephone diaphragm created indentations in a piece of paper. This simple observation led him to wonder if sound vibrations could be recorded and then reproduced. Working with his team, Edison created a device with a cylinder wrapped in tinfoil. A needle attached to a diaphragm would indent the tinfoil when sound waves hit the diaphragm. By reversing the process, running the needle over the indentations while connected to another diaphragm, the original sounds could be reproduced. The first words Edison recorded and played back were the nursery rhyme, "Mary had a little lamb," spoken in his gentle, slightly nasal voice. The sound quality was poor by today's standards, tinny and distant. But it was the first time in human history that a voice had been captured and preserved, able to be heard again long after the original sound waves had faded away. The motion picture camera followed a similar path of development. Edison and his team, particularly his colleague William Kennedy Laurie Dixon, created a device called the kinetograph to capture moving images on film, and the kinetoscope to view them. These early motion pictures were simple affairs, brief glimpses of people in motion, animals moving, or scenes from everyday life. Viewers would look through a peephole at the top of a wooden cabinet to see these moving images, one person at a time. The experience was intimate and personal, a quiet moment of wonder as still photographs seemed to come to life. Throughout his long career, Edison's approach remained consistent, patient observation, methodical experimentation, and practical application. His laboratory at West Orange, New Jersey, which he established after Menlo Park, was even larger and more comprehensive than its predecessor. Walking through its spacious rooms, one would hear the gentle sounds of creation, the soft scratching of pencils on paper as ideas were sketched out, the quiet conversations between collaborators sharing insights, the barely audible clicks and whirs of experimental devices being tested and refined. Edison's influence extended far beyond his specific inventions. He helped to create the modern research and development laboratory, where teams of specialists could work together on complex problems. The soft-spoken inventor understood that innovation flourished in an environment where ideas could be freely shared, where different perspectives could be brought to bear on a problem, and where failure was seen not as an endpoint, but as a stepping stone to eventual success. His approach to patent protection and commercialization also changed how invention was viewed. Edison saw clearly that an invention that remained in the laboratory, however brilliant, had little impact on the world. With calm determination, he worked to bring his creations to market, to make them practical and affordable for ordinary people. The gentle glow of electric lights in homes across America was testament to his success in this endeavor. As the years passed, Edison's hearing continued to deteriorate, a condition that had begun in his childhood. Rather than viewing this as a handicap, he often spoke of it as an advantage, allowing him to concentrate deeply without distraction. In the peaceful quiet of his own world, he could focus entirely on the problem at hand, undisturbed by the noise and commotion that might distract others. Edison's work ethic was legendary, but it was not the frantic pace of someone driven by anxiety or ambition. Rather, it was the steady, unhurried application of attention and effort toward goals he found meaningful. He would often work through the night, not because he was racing against a deadline, but because he was so absorbed in the gentle flow of exploration and discovery that he lost track of time. His assistant would sometimes find him in the morning, asleep on a workbench, a half-completed experiment before him, his breathing deep and regular in the quiet of the laboratory. The inventor's relationship with his second wife, Mina Miller Edison, provided a peaceful counterpoint to his work. In the evenings when he did return home, they would often sit together in the library of their home, Glenmont, in West Orange, New Jersey. The room would be lit by the soft glow of electric lights, his own invention, as they read together or discussed the events of the day. Mina, an accomplished pianist, would sometimes play for him, though his hearing loss meant he experienced the music more through vibration than sound. These quiet domestic moments provided a necessary balance to the intellectual challenges of his work. As Edison aged, his pace slowed, but his curiosity never dimmed. Even in his 70s and 80s, he continued to explore new ideas and refine existing ones. Government, bringing his methodical approach to problems of national security. After the war, he became interested in finding domestic sources of rubber, testing thousands of plants for their rubber content. With the same patient persistence he had shown in searching for the perfect light bulb filament decades earlier. Throughout his life, Edison maintained a special relationship with nature. Despite being known for technologies that in some ways separated people from the natural world, he himself found great peace and inspiration in natural settings. He would often take breaks from his work to walk through the grounds around his laboratory or his home, observing plants and animals with the same careful attention he brought to his experiments. The gentle rustle of leaves, the soft calls of birds, the play of light and shadow beneath the trees. These natural rhythms seemed to restore and refresh him. Edison's final years were spent largely at his winter home in Fort Myers, Florida, where he had established a laboratory and botanical garden. Here, surrounded by tropical plants and bathed in warm sunshine, he continued his research into natural rubber sources. The pace was unhurried, the atmosphere tranquil. Friends who visited noted that he seemed content, his mind still engaged with problems that interested him, his curiosity undiminished by age. When Thomas Edison passed away on October 18, 1931, at the age of 84, the world dimmed its lights in his honor. In a touching tribute, people across America turned off their electric lights for 1 minute, acknowledging the man whose patient work had brought illumination to their homes and workplaces. It was perhaps the most fitting memorial possible, a brief return to darkness that highlighted the gift of light he had given the world. Edison's legacy lives on not just in his specific inventions, the practical electric light, the phonograph, motion pictures, and many others, but in his approach to innovation, his patient persistence, his methodical experimentation, his collaborative approach, and his focus on practical applications that could improve everyday life continue to inspire inventors and innovators around the world. As we drift toward sleep, we might imagine Edison in his laboratory, surrounded by the tools of creation, his mind engaged with possibilities, his hands busy with experiments. The soft glow of electric light illuminates his workspace, a tangible manifestation of what can be achieved through patient effort and unwavering determination. In this peaceful image, there is a lesson for us all that great achievements often come not in dramatic moments of inspiration, but through the gentle, persistent application of curiosity, knowledge, and purpose. And with this soothing thought, we can allow ourselves to slip into restful slumber, carried on the soft currents of dreams toward tomorrow's possibilities. Our soothing biography continues with a look at the next important period in this incredible life, beyond the bustling laboratories and the constant hum of invention. Thomas Edison lived a rich personal life filled with quiet moments, meaningful relationships, and simple pleasures that brought him joy. As we settle in and allow our minds to drift toward the more intimate aspects of the great inventor's life, let us gently explore the man behind the patents, the father behind the phonograph, the husband beyond the headlines, in the comfort of his home, away from the public eye. Edison revealed himself to be a man of simple tastes and endearing habits. Each morning, he would rise with the sun, often after just 4 or 5 hours of sleep, a pattern he maintained throughout his adult life. He believed that sleep was merely a habit, one that could be trained and minimized to allow more time for living and working. As you rest now, imagine Edison in those early morning hours, moving quietly through his home in West Orange, New Jersey, perhaps pausing by a window to observe the first light touching the trees outside, his mind already turning over new ideas like leaves in a gentle breeze. Edison's breakfast was typically modest, some fruit, perhaps, and a cup of milk. He favored simple foods throughout his life, often eating little during periods of intense work. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he abstained from alcohol and tobacco, finding that they dulled his senses and diminished his productivity. Instead, he indulged in an almost constant consumption of chewing gum, a habit that helped him think, and copious amounts of coffee, which fueled his legendary work sessions that sometimes stretched across days without formal rest. In his personal relationships, Edison revealed a complexity that mirrored his inventive mind. And William, but also periods of separation, as Edison's work consumed him. Mary, 16 years his junior when they wed, found herself married to a man whose mind often seemed to reside in his laboratory rather than in their home. She passed away in 1884 at the young age of 29, leaving Edison a widower with 3 children and a growing empire of innovation to manage. 2 years later, Edison found love again with Mina Miller, the daughter of a wealthy inventor and businessman. Their courtship was sweetly unconventional. Edison taught Mina Morse code, and during social gatherings, they would tap messages to each other on their hands, sharing private conversations amid crowded rooms. This secret language between them symbolized the deep connection they would maintain throughout their marriage. With Mina, Edison had 3 more children, Madeline, Charles, and Theodore, completing his family of 6 children who would grow up in the shadow of their father's fame, but also in the warmth of his affection. At home with Mina and their children at Glenmont, their estate in West Orange, Edison revealed a softer side than his public persona suggested. He delighted in simple family pleasures, reading to his younger children, taking long walks through the grounds with Mina, playing the piano, though not particularly well, and entertaining guests with his surprisingly good singing voice. His home became a refuge from the demands of his work, though the line between personal and professional often blurred, with Edison frequently bringing problems from the laboratory home to ponder during quiet evening hours. Edison's relationship with his children was complex and evolving. With his older children from his first marriage, he was often an absent figure during their early years, consumed by the demands of his work during a period of intense invention. As they grew older and he remarried, he made efforts to involve them in his business enterprises, particularly his sons Thomas Jr. and William, though these relationships sometimes became strained under the weight of his expectations and their desire for independence. With his second family, Edison was more present, perhaps mellowed by age and success. He took particular delight in his daughter Madeline, who shared his curiosity and intelligence. Charles, his middle son with Mina, would eventually take over much of his father's business interests, while Theodore carved his own path, showing the independent spirit that seemed to run through the Edison bloodline. In quiet moments between his inventive pursuits, Edison found joy in several personal interests that helped balance his intensely focused work life. He was an avid reader with a voracious appetite for knowledge. His personal library contained thousands of volumes on subjects ranging from practical science and engineering to philosophy, history, and literature. He often read late into the night, absorbing information that might later find application in his work, or simply satisfying his boundless curiosity about the world. Music brought Edison particular pleasure, which is perhaps unsurprising given his work on the phonograph. He enjoyed listening to recordings of classical pieces and opera, sometimes closing his eyes to focus entirely on the sounds that his own invention had made possible to capture and replay, though his hearing was significantly impaired from childhood, the result of scarlet fever, a train accident, or perhaps both. He could still appreciate music by feeling its vibrations, or by listening through specially designed headphones that compensated for his hearing loss. Nature offered Edison another source of rejuvenation. Despite his reputation as a tireless worker who could spend days in his laboratory without leaving, he valued time outdoors at his winter home in Fort Myers, Florida, which he purchased in 1885. Edison established a garden of exotic plants and trees, experimenting with various species, much as he did with materials in his laboratory. These excursions into the countryside allowed Edison to disconnect from the demands of his work and reconnect with the natural world that had fascinated him since childhood. Edison's philosophical outlook was shaped by his experiences and his inherently practical nature. He considered himself a free thinker rather than an adherent to any formal religion, though he expressed belief in a higher power or intelligence behind the universe's design. His views on spirituality evolved throughout his life, particularly as he aged and contemplated mortality more directly. In his later years, he conducted experiments attempting to communicate with the dead, not out of superstition, but from his characteristic curiosity and desire to apply scientific methods to all questions, even those concerning the afterlife. His personal philosophy emphasized the value of hard work, persistence, and practical application over theory. This belief informed not only his approach to invention, but his view of life itself, that meaningful achievement came through sustained effort rather than momentary flashes of brilliance. As you rest now, consider how comforting this perspective might be. That greatness lies not in rare moments of inspiration, but in the patient application of effort day after day. Edison's daily habits reflected his pragmatic nature. He was methodical in his approach to both work and personal life, keeping detailed notebooks of his ideas and observations. These journals, which numbered in the thousands by the end of his life, contained not only technical sketches and experimental results, but personal reflections, observations about nature, and occasional poetry. Writing was for Edison both a practical tool and a means of processing his thoughts, a quiet activity that brought order to his constantly active mind. Despite his fame and success, Edison maintained relatively simple personal tastes. His clothing was functional rather than fashionable, and he showed little interest in the trappings of wealth beyond what allowed him to continue his work and provide for his family. He did, however, enjoy certain comforts: a good chair in which to read, quality tools for his experiments, and later in life, automobiles for transportation and exploration. As Edison aged, he developed rituals that brought him comfort and continuity. Each year on his birthday, February 11th, he would gather with family for a modest celebration, often receiving books as gifts, which pleased him more than any luxury item could. He maintained correspondence with friends and fellow inventors around the world, exchanging ideas and observations in letters written in his distinctive, flowing handwriting. Sleep, which Edison claimed to need little of, nonetheless played an interesting role in his creative process. Though he prided himself on requiring minimal rest, observers noted that he would often take short naps throughout the day, sometimes dozing in a chair or on a workbench in his laboratory. During these brief periods of rest, solutions to problems would sometimes come to him, emerging from his subconscious as his conscious mind relaxed its grip. Perhaps in this, there is wisdom for us all, that rest is not merely the absence of activity, but an essential part of the creative process, allowing our minds to make connections that focused attention might miss. In his final years, as his health began to decline, Edison found peace in simpler pleasures: watching birds in his garden, listening to music on the phonograph he had invented decades earlier, and spending quiet evenings with Mina, who had been his companion for 45 years. His pace slowed, but his curiosity remained, his mind still turning over problems and possibilities, even as his body weakened. As we drift towards sleep ourselves, we might imagine Edison in one of these peaceful moments, perhaps sitting on the porch of his Florida winter home, watching the sunset paint the sky in gentle hues of orange and pink, the warm breeze carrying the scent of the exotic plants he had collected from around the world. His hands, which had created so much, rest quietly in his lap. His eyes, which had observed so carefully, gaze softly at the horizon. His mind, which had worked so tirelessly, finds a moment of tranquil appreciation for the beauty and wonder of the world he had helped to transform. In this gentle image of Edison at rest, there is perhaps the most important lesson of his personal life: that even the most driven and productive among us need moments of quiet reflection, of simple joy, of connection with others and with the natural world. As sleep begins to enfold us in its gentle embrace, we can carry this soothing thought with us into our dreams, allowing the rhythm of our breath to slow and our minds to drift peacefully into rest. Just as Edison himself finally found rest after a life of remarkable creation and discovery. Let your mind float with these gentle recollections as we move forward in our story. The journey of Thomas Edison was not without its valleys and shadows, those quiet moments of doubt and difficulty that shaped his character as surely as his triumphs shaped his legacy. As we continue our gentle exploration of this remarkable man's life, let us turn now to the challenges that visited him along his path, like soft rain on a window pane, persistent, yet somehow part of the beauty of the whole experience. In the early days of Edison's career, when he was just a young telegraph operator, he faced the gentle but persistent obstacle of his hearing loss. This condition had begun in his childhood, possibly from scarlet fever, though Edison himself sometimes attributed it to an incident when a train conductor lifted him by his ears onto a moving train. Whatever the cause, the world of sound gradually receded from him like the tide drawing away from shore. Yet Edison found in this challenge an unexpected gift. The quieter world allowed him to concentrate deeply, to sink into problems without distraction. My deafness has not been a handicap, but a help, he once remarked in a moment of reflection. The soft silence that surrounded Edison became a cocoon within which his ideas could take shape. Like dreams forming in the peaceful darkness of night, he learned to read lips and to feel vibrations, adapting to his changing senses with the same creativity he applied to his inventions. This early challenge taught him patience and perspective, qualities that would serve him well through the many difficulties that lay ahead on his winding path. As Edison established his first small laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, financial worries would often visit him in the quiet hours. Money flowed through his hands like water, spent on materials, on failed experiments, on the salaries of the men who worked alongside him. There were nights when Edison would lie awake, the moonlight casting gentle shadows across his bedroom, wondering if his next invention would bring the funds needed to continue his work. These financial pressures were a constant companion, a soft but persistent voice whispering doubts into his ear. Yet Edison responded to these concerns with a tranquil determination. He would rise in the morning, splash cool water on his face, and return to his laboratory with renewed purpose. When funds grew particularly tight, he would turn his attention to smaller, more practical inventions that might bring immediate income, improvements to telegraph systems, stock tickers, and other devices that businesses would purchase quickly. Like a gardener who plants quick-growing vegetables alongside slower fruit trees, Edison balanced his grand visions with practical necessities, learning the delicate art of patience in the process. Perhaps the most soothing lesson Edison learned from these financial challenges was the value of persistence. Many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. He once observed, in a quiet moment of reflection, this gentle wisdom came not from easy success, but from the many times he had pushed through difficulty, continuing his work even when resources seemed as scarce as stars on a cloudy night. The fire that consumed Edison's laboratory in December of 1914 represents one of the most profound challenges he faced in his long career. Edison was 67 years old when flames engulfed his West Orange complex, destroying buildings, equipment, and years of research. The fire spread with a quiet hunger through the night, consuming chemicals that created beautiful but devastating colors in the darkness. Blues and greens and purples rising into the winter sky. By morning, damage estimated at $919,788. An enormous sum at the time had been done. With years of records and experiments reduced to ash and embers, the scene the next day was one of quiet desolation. Workers stood in small groups, speaking in hushed tones as they surveyed the ruins. Some wept silently at the loss of their life's work. Edison's son, Charles, found his father watching the smoldering remains with a strange tranquility. This response reveals something profound about Edison's approach to setbacks. Rather than allowing himself to be consumed by grief or anger, emotions that would have been entirely understandable, he chose to see the opportunity hidden within the loss. The next morning, Edison gathered his employees and spoke to them with gentle determination. Within weeks, the work of rebuilding had begun, with Edison redesigning the complex to be more efficient than before. Like a forest that regrows after a fire, incorporating the nutrients of what was lost into new growth, Edison's laboratory rose again, improved by the very disaster that had threatened to end his work. The night after the fire, Edison slept deeply for the first time in years. Perhaps there was a kind of release in having so much taken away at once, a liberation from the weight of past work, and the freedom to begin again with a clean slate. This teaches us that sometimes our greatest challenges can bring unexpected gifts, the chance to start anew, to reimagine what might be possible, to release ourselves from paths that may have been leading nowhere. Throughout his career, Edison faced countless technical failures, each one a small disappointment in the quiet hours of the laboratory. His work on the light bulb is perhaps the most famous example of this patient persistence through failure. Over many months, Edison and his team tested more than 6,000 plant materials as potential filaments for the incandescent bulb. Each attempt followed a gentle rhythm, the careful preparation of the material, the delicate placement within the glass bulb, the evacuation of air, the application of electricity, and then the soft watching and waiting to see if this might be the solution they sought. Most often, the result was failure. The filament would glow briefly and then fade to darkness, like a star disappearing at dawn. Or it would burn too brightly and then vanish in a flash, leaving only a puff of smoke within the glass. Each failure was noted in Edison's meticulous records. each one eliminated as a possibility. When asked about all these unsuccessful attempts, Edison replied with his characteristic gentle wisdom, "I have not failed." In these quiet hours of repeated disappointment, Edison developed a relationship with failure that few of us achieve. He came to see each unsuccessful experiment not as a defeat, but as a step forward, an elimination of one possibility that brought him closer to success, like a person walking through a maze who discovers a dead end and calmly turns back to try another path. Edison moved through his failures with a tranquil acceptance that they were simply part of the journey. The carbonized bamboo filament that eventually proved successful came after thousands of these gentle failures. When it finally burned steadily for over 13 hours, there was no great celebration, no shouting or dancing in the laboratory. Instead, there was a quiet satisfaction, a peaceful acknowledgement that patience had been rewarded. Edison sat watching the glowing bulb in the darkness, his face illuminated by the soft light of his perseverance. Personal losses, too, visited Edison throughout his life, each one leaving its mark upon his heart. The death of his first wife, Mary, in 1884, left him a widower with 3 young children. The loss came suddenly. Mary had suffered from a brain tumor that was only diagnosed in its final stages. Edison had been absorbed in his work, and some biographers suggest he carried a quiet guilt about not recognizing the seriousness of her condition sooner. In the weeks after Mary's passing, Edison would sometimes be found sitting alone in his library late at night, a book open but unread in his lap, his gaze distant as if looking into memories. The children would hear him moving about the house in the small hours, unable to find rest. Yet, even in this deeply personal grief, Edison eventually found his way forward. He hired a young woman named Mina Miller to help care for his children, and in time, their relationship blossomed into love. They married in 1886, beginning a partnership that would last for the rest of Edison's life. What Edison learned from this personal loss was the gentle truth that life continues its flow even after great sadness, like a stream that finds new channels after a fallen tree blocks its path. He came to understand that grief and joy could exist together, that new beginnings could honor rather than replace what had been lost. This wisdom informed his approach to other losses and challenges in his life. The death of friends and colleagues, the growing distance from his children as they pursued their own paths, the gradual recognition of his own mortality as he aged. Edison's relationship with his children presented another kind of challenge, one more subtle than fires or financial worries, but perhaps more difficult to resolve. His absorption in his work meant that he was often absent from their daily lives, present in body but distant in mind, struggled particularly with living in the shadow of his famous father, eventually changing his name and moving away to establish his own identity. In his later years, Edison would sometimes speak of this regret in quiet moments, acknowledging that his single-minded focus on invention had come at a cost to his family relationships. That this gentle regret teaches us something important about balance, about the need to tend to our personal gardens even as we pursue our work in the world. Edison's challenge with his family reminds us that success in one area of life does not automatically bring fulfillment in others, that each relationship requires its own kind of attention and care, like different plants needing different amounts of sunlight and water to thrive. As Edison entered his 70s, health challenges began to visit him more frequently, like old acquaintances stopping by with increasing regularity. Diabetes affected his energy and required careful management of his diet. His eyesight, which had served him so well in his detailed work, began to dim slightly, requiring stronger glasses and better lighting. His hands, which had built so many devices, occasionally trembled with a slight palsy that made fine work more difficult. Edison approached these physical changes with the same quiet adaptability he had shown throughout his life. When his eyesight weakened, he designed better lighting for his workbench. When his hands became less steady, he developed tools with larger handles and braces to support his arms. When diabetes restricted his diet, he approached the challenge with scientific curiosity, researching nutrition and developing new recipes that satisfied both his health needs and his taste preferences. In these physical limitations, Edison found yet another opportunity for innovation, turning his inventive mind to the challenges of his own body. There is something deeply moving about this. The man who had created so many devices to extend human capabilities, now creating quiet adaptations for his own diminishing ones. It reminds us that creativity can serve us throughout our lives, helping us adapt to each new season with grace and ingenuity. The greatest test of Edison's resilience came not from external events, but from within his own mind, the challenge of remaining open to new ideas in a rapidly changing world. As the 20th century progressed, new scientific theories emerged that challenged Edison's understanding of electricity and matter. Einstein's theories of relativity, the development of quantum mechanics, and advances in theoretical physics presented concepts that were difficult for Edison to reconcile with his practical, experimental approach to science. In moments of frustration, Edison would sometimes dismiss these new theories as abstract nonsense, preferring to trust what he could observe and measure directly. Yet, in his better moments, often in the quiet evenings as he sat on his porch watching the stars emerge, he would acknowledge the limitations of his own understanding with a humble acceptance that was perhaps his most admirable quality. This gentle humility in the face of the universe's mysteries allowed Edison to continue learning even into his final years, to approach new ideas with curiosity rather than rejection, to maintain the wonder that had driven him since childhood, drifting like clouds across the evening sky, we now move to the next part of this calming life story. In the gentle glow of early evening light, when the world seems to slow its hurried pace, we might find ourselves drifting back to another time, another place, where the modern world, as we know, it was just beginning to take shape. It was into this world that Thomas Alva Edison was born. On a cold winter's day in February of 1847, in the small village of Milan, Ohio. As we settle in and allow our minds to wander through the corridors of time, let us explore the tapestry of history that surrounded this remarkable inventor. The soft background hum of a world in transformation that provided the canvas for his innovations. The America of Edison's childhood was a nation still finding its identity, still expanding westward across vast prairies and mountain ranges. When young Thomas took his first breath, the Mexican-American War was drawing to a close, bringing California and the Southwest into the Union. The gold rush would soon follow, drawing dreamers and fortune seekers westward. Much like Edison himself would later be drawn to the possibilities of electricity and sound, Edison's early years unfolded against a backdrop of growing tension in America. The debate over slavery intensified as he learned his letters and developed his curiosity about how things worked. By the time he was a teenager, selling newspapers on trains, the nation had torn itself apart in civil war. One can imagine young Thomas, with his hearing already diminished from a childhood illness, perhaps experiencing the war differently than others, feeling the vibrations of cannon fire through the ground rather than hearing their distant thunder, reading about battles in the very newspapers he sold rather than listening to excited talk about the latest news. The pace of life in those days moved with a certain gentleness that we might envy now. Candles and oil lamps provided soft, warm illumination as darkness fell. Communication traveled at the speed of a horse's gallop, or a steam engine's steady progress. The telegraph, which would become Edison's first serious technological interest, was still a marvel, sending messages with unprecedented speed across growing distances. As we breathe deeply and settle further into our comfortable rest, we can picture young Edison learning Morse code, his fingers tapping out messages, his mind already wondering how this technology might be improved. The post-Civil War era, known as the Reconstruction period, coincided with Edison's early adulthood and first inventive efforts. As the nation attempted to heal its wounds and rebuild, Edison too was constructing something new, a career as an inventor. The rhythms of American life were changing during this time. Cities grew larger and more crowded as immigration increased. Industry expanded, with factories, railroads, and mining operations transforming the landscape and creating new possibilities for technological innovation. The gentle tick of a pendulum clock might remind us of how Edison's early work as a telegrapher shaped his understanding of time and precision. In telegraph offices across the Midwest, he observed the importance of reliable, consistent operation of machines. The steady clicking of telegraph keys provided a soothing background rhythm to his developing thoughts about electrical systems and communication technologies. As the 1870s arrived with their soft golden light of progress and innovation, Edison established his famous laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. The world around him continued its gradual transformation. The Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia in 1876 celebrated 100 years of American independence, with displays of new technologies from around the world. Visitors marveled at Alexander Graham Bell's telephone, another communication device that would soon change how people connected with one another across distances. Edison's work unfolded against this backdrop of growing technological optimism. The Victorian era, spanning much of the 19th century, brought with it particular sensibilities about progress, morality, and the role of science in improving human life. Queen Victoria's long reign in England influenced culture far beyond British shores, creating an atmosphere where innovation was celebrated, but also expected to uphold certain values and contribute to social improvement. The gentle rustling of women's long skirts and the soft click of men's boots on wooden floors provided the soundtrack to this era of proper manners and formal social interactions. Edison himself, though often absorbed in his work and somewhat indifferent to social niceties, nevertheless operated within this cultural context. His inventions were celebrated not just for their technical ingenuity, but for how they might improve home life, education, and moral development. As we sink deeper into our comfortable rest, we might imagine the soft glow of Edison's most famous invention, the practical incandescent light bulb, perfected in 1879. Before this innovation, darkness was held at bay by the warm, flickering light of gas lamps and candles. Edison's steady, reliable electric light changed humanity's relationship with the night, extending productive hours and creating new possibilities for evening activities. The soft, steady illumination from his carbon filament bulbs gradually replaced the dancing shadows cast by older forms of lighting. The 1880s brought the Gilded Age, a time of rapid economic growth, industrialization, and widening gaps between the wealthy and the poor. Edison's work continued against this complex social backdrop. This technical debate unfolded alongside growing labor unrest, immigration debates, and questions about America's identity in a rapidly changing world. The gentle hum of Edison's early electrical generators might remind us of how new sounds were entering the human experience during this period. The world was becoming louder, more mechanized, yet still maintained pockets of tranquility where one could escape the growing noise of progress. Edison himself sought such quiet spaces for thinking, though his own hearing difficulties, perhaps, gave him a different relationship with silence than most people experienced. As the calendar pages turned softly into the 1890s, Edison's work expanded to include motion pictures. The world was increasingly fascinated with capturing and reproducing reality. Photography had already transformed how people preserved memories, and now Edison's kinetoscope offered moving images, brief glimpses of dancers, athletes, and everyday scenes that viewers could watch with wonder. These early films, flickering with a gentle rhythm, offered a new way of seeing the world, of preserving moments that would otherwise be lost to time. The closing years of the 19th century brought with them a certain reflective quality. As people contemplated the enormous changes the Victorian era had witnessed, telegraph lines crisscrossed continents and ocean floors. Railroads connected distant cities. Factories produced goods in quantities never before imagined, and Edison's electrical innovations were gradually transforming homes, businesses, and public spaces. As the new century dawned with its soft, promising light, Edison was already in his 50s, an established inventor with hundreds of patents to his name. The world around him continued to change, sometimes at a pace that could feel unsettling. The Wright brothers took to the air in 1903. Einstein published his special theory of relativity in 1905. The first Model T Ford rolled off the assembly line in 1908. The world was accelerating, moving from the stately pace of the Victorian era to the more frenetic rhythms of the 20th century. Edison's later years coincided with profound global changes. The gentle turning of Earth's seasons continued, but human events moved with increasing speed and sometimes violence. World War I erupted in 1914, bringing mechanized warfare on an unprecedented scale. Edison contributed to the war effort, working on various defense projects and chairing the Naval Consulting Board. The conflict's end in 1918 left a changed world. Empires had fallen, boundaries redrawn, and millions of lives lost. The 1920s brought their own distinctive atmosphere, jazz rhythms, changing social norms, and economic prosperity that preceded the devastating crash of 1929. Edison, now in his 70s and 80s, witnessed these changes with the perspective of one who had seen America transform from a largely agricultural nation to an industrial and technological powerhouse. His own work had contributed significantly to this transformation. Throughout these changing times, Edison maintained his curious nature and work ethic. The soft scratching of his pencil on paper as he sketched new ideas continued well into his later years. The gentle click of switches and hum of equipment in his laboratory provided a constant backdrop to his thinking. Even as newer scientific theories emerged that challenged his understanding of electricity and matter. Edison continued to approach the world with wonder. The greatest test of Edison's resilience came not from external events, but from within his own mind. The challenge of remaining open to new ideas in a rapidly changing world. As the 20th century progressed, new scientific theories emerged that challenged Edison's understanding of electricity and matter. Einstein's theories of relativity, the development of quantum mechanics, and advances in theoretical physics presented concepts that were difficult for Edison to reconcile with his practical, experimental approach to science. In moments of frustration, Edison would sometimes dismiss these new theories as abstract nonsense, preferring to trust what he could observe and measure directly. Yet, in his better moments, often in the quiet evenings as he sat on his porch watching the stars emerge, he would acknowledge the limitations of his own understanding with a humble acceptance that was perhaps his most admirable quality. This gentle humility in the face of the universe's mysteries allowed Edison to continue learning even into his final years, to approach new ideas with curiosity rather than rejection, to maintain the wonder that had driven him since childhood. As we continue our peaceful journey through Edison's era, we might imagine the soft evening breeze rustling through trees outside his home in West Orange, New Jersey. The world had changed dramatically during his lifetime. When he was born, messages traveled by horseback. When he died in 1931, radio waves carried voices instantly across continents and oceans. The soft glow of electric lights that we now take for granted was one of his most significant contributions to modern life. Edison's final years unfolded against the backdrop of the Great Depression, a time of economic hardship that tested American resilience. Though his own health was declining, Edison continued to think about problems and possibilities. The gentle rhythm of his breathing, becoming more labored as his health failed, eventually stilled on October 18, 1931. As a tribute to his contributions, electric lights were dimmed across America for 1 minute on the evening of his funeral. A moment of soft darkness, acknowledging how much light he had brought into the world. The technological world we inhabit today grew from seeds planted during Edison's lifetime. The gentle glow of our screens, the soft hum of our devices, the recorded voices and images that surround us, all have their origins in innovations that Edison helped to develop or inspire. As we drift toward sleep, we might reflect on how the past flows into the present like a gentle stream, carrying ideas and innovations forward through time. Edison's life reminds us that progress often comes not in dramatic leaps, but through persistent, patient effort, much like the slow, steady breathing that carries us toward restful sleep. His thousands of experiments, many unsuccessful, demonstrate the value of gentle perseverance. The soft light of his incandescent bulbs reminds us that even the most transformative innovations can bring a certain warmth and comfort to our lives as our thoughts grow quieter and our breathing deepens. We might imagine Edison in his laboratory, surrounded by the tools of his trade, working by the soft light of his own invention, pursuing questions with the same curiosity that had driven him since childhood. In this peaceful image, we find not just a historical figure, but a reminder of the quiet persistence that often underlies humanity's greatest achievements. As your breathing becomes more regular, let us continue with the next chapter of our biography in the gentle twilight hours of a February evening in 1847. A child named Thomas Alva Edison came into this world in the small town of Milan, Ohio. The soft lamplight of oil lamps would have illuminated the room where young Thomas first opened his eyes, unaware that he would one day transform how humanity experiences darkness and light as we settle in and allow our thoughts to drift toward this remarkable life. Let us wander unhurriedly through the quiet gardens of Edison's journey, pausing here and there to admire the blooms of his creativity and perseverance. Thomas was not a conventional child. His mind seemed to float in directions all its own, like autumn leaves carried gently on a stream. His teachers found him difficult to manage, mistaking his different way of thinking for slowness. After only 3 months of formal education, his mother Nancy decided to teach him at home, where his curiosity could unfold at its own natural pace. In the soft embrace of his mother's patience, young Thomas discovered the joy of books, reading works by Shakespeare and Dickens before he was 12 years old. As we breathe deeply and relax into this story, we might imagine the young boy sitting by a window, the pages turning slowly as his imagination expanded with each word. There is a soothing symmetry in how Edison's hearing loss, which began in childhood, may have helped him develop the deep concentration that would serve him throughout his life. The world for Edison became a quieter place, allowing him to sink deeply into his thoughts without distraction. Some believe his hearing difficulties resulted from scarlet fever, while others suggest it came from an incident where a conductor lifted him by his ears onto a train. Whatever the cause, Edison never viewed this as a limitation, but rather as a quality that allowed him to work in peaceful focus. As we rest and listen to this tale, we might appreciate how life's challenges can sometimes become unexpected gifts. When he was just 12 years old, Thomas began selling newspapers and candy on the Grand Trunk Railroad. The rhythmic movement of the train cars, gently rocking back and forth along the tracks between Port Huron and Detroit, became the backdrop for his early entrepreneurial ventures. In a quiet corner of a baggage car, young Edison set up a small laboratory where he could conduct experiments during the long, meandering journey. The soft chugging of the locomotive and the distant whistle created a lullaby for his scientific dreams. One day, as the train rocked soothingly along its iron path, a phosphorus bottle in Thomas's makeshift laboratory fell and caught fire. The conductor, understandably concerned, evicted both Thomas and his laboratory from the train. As we sink deeper into relaxation, we might smile gently at this image of the young inventor, standing beside the tracks with his precious equipment, undeterred by this momentary setback. This pattern of facing obstacles with calm persistence would become a hallmark of Edison's approach to life. In the soft glow of memory, we find Edison as a young telegraph operator, his fingers tapping out messages across the wires that connected distant places. The gentle rhythm of Morse code became a soothing cadence in his life. During the quiet overnight shifts, when the world around him slept, Edison would experiment and read, making use of the peaceful hours to expand his knowledge. There is a story that he developed a device that would automatically send a signal to his supervisor every hour, allowing him to nap between signals. Whether true or apocryphal, this tale speaks to Edison's creative approach to solving life's little challenges. Edison's first patented invention came in 1869, a gentle electronic vote recorder intended for legislative bodies. Though technically successful, the invention found no market. Legislators, it seemed, preferred the slower pace of traditional voting, which allowed time for political maneuvering. This early disappointment taught Edison a valuable lesson that would guide his future endeavors. Invention must meet genuine needs to find success. As we breathe slowly and deeply, we might reflect on how even disappointments can guide us toward better paths if we remain open to their lessons. In the warm summer of 1869, Edison arrived in New York City with little money in his pockets, but a mind rich with ideas. A fortunate opportunity arose when he repaired a broken stock ticker at the Gold Indicator Company. His skillful hands, working with gentle precision, so impressed the company that they hired him to manage their equipment. As the soft evening light fades and our bodies grow heavier with approaching sleep, we might imagine Edison's careful movements as he restored the delicate mechanism to working order, unaware that this moment would open doors to his future. The rhythm of Edison's life took on a new cadence when he established his first small laboratory in Newark, New Jersey. There, surrounded by the tools of creation, he began to develop improved stock tickers and telegraph equipment. The quiet clicking of these devices must have created a soothing backdrop as Edison worked into the night, his mind flowing from one idea to the next like a stream, finding its way through a peaceful meadow. In 1876, Edison created a special place that would nurture his greatest achievements, his laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. As we sink deeper into comfort, picture this unique space filled with bottles of chemicals lining the walls, apparatus of glass and metal catching the light, and the soft murmur of assistants working on various projects. The air would have been filled with the gentle scents of chemicals, warm metal, and the oil from the lamps that illuminated their work. It was at Menlo Park that Edison and his team created the phonograph in 1877. Imagine the wonder of that moment when, for the first time in human history, a human voice was captured and then released back into the world. The first words Edison recorded were the simple nursery rhyme, "Mary had a little lamb," spoken in his calm, measured voice into the mouthpiece of his new creation. When the machine played back those same words, it must have seemed like a kind of magic. As we rest and listen to this story, we might appreciate how sounds from the past, perhaps even the sound of our own breathing, drift through time like gentle echoes. Edison's work on the incandescent light bulb unfolded with the patient persistence that characterized his approach to invention. Over many months, he tested thousands of materials, seeking the perfect filament that would glow with warm light without quickly burning out. There is something deeply soothing in imagining Edison and his team working through the night. The laboratory illuminated by gas lamps as they sought to create a new kind of light. After more than 6,000 experiments with different materials, they found success with a carbonized bamboo filament that could burn for over 1,200 hours. As we breathe slowly and evenly, we might visualize the soft, warm glow of that first successful bulb, illuminating the tired but satisfied faces of Edison and his team. Lesser known is Edison's work on the electric pen, a precursor to modern tattoo needles and copy machines. This device used a small motor to move a needle up and down, punching tiny holes in paper to create a stencil. When ink was rolled over this stencil, it would pass through the holes to create copies on papers placed beneath. The gentle buzzing sound of this pen must have been a constant companion during its development. Like the soft hum of a bumblebee on a lazy summer afternoon, Edison's life was not only filled with invention, but also with family and quiet moments of joy. In 1871, he married Mary Stilwell, who had worked at one of his shops. Their home life brought a different kind of warmth to Edison's world. And William. Edison, though often absorbed in his work, found time to share tender moments with his family. There is a touching story of how he created a special telegraph line between his home and laboratory so he could tap out messages of love to his wife throughout the day. As we drift toward sleep, we might imagine these gentle expressions of affection traveling along the wires, connecting two hearts despite physical distance. After Mary's passing in 1884, Edison found love again with Mina Miller, whom he married in 1886. Their courtship has a particularly charming quality. Edison taught Mina Morse code so they could tap messages to each other on their hands when in company, sharing private conversations through gentle touch without speaking aloud. This quiet, intimate form of communication seems perfectly suited to our current state of peaceful reflection. Edison's relationship with his children revealed a playful side to his nature. He would create special puzzles and toys for them, bringing his inventive mind to the art of parenting. His daughter Marion recalled how her father would sometimes take breaks from his work to lie on the grass with his children, watching clouds drift across the sky and describing the shapes he saw. These moments of quiet wonder remind us that even the most brilliant minds need time for simple pleasures and rest. The peaceful grounds of Edison's estate in West Orange, New Jersey, provided a sanctuary where he could stroll among the trees and flowers, allowing his thoughts to wander freely. He believed that some of his best ideas came during these unhurried walks, when his mind was relaxed and open. The gentle rustling of leaves and the soft songs of birds created a natural symphony that refreshed his spirit after long hours in the laboratory. As our bodies grow heavier with approaching sleep, we might imagine joining Edison on one of these tranquil walks, our footsteps falling softly on the garden paths. Edison had a special fondness for camping trips with his friends Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone. These industrial visionaries called themselves the Vagabonds and would travel to quiet places in the countryside, setting up tents and cooking over open fires. Away from the demands of their busy lives, they would share stories and ideas under star-filled skies. Edison particularly enjoyed these opportunities to connect with nature and simple living. The crackling of the campfire and the chorus of night insects would have created a soothing backdrop for their conversations, much like the gentle sounds that might be accompanying us now as we rest. In his later years, Edison continued to work with the same patient dedication that had characterized his earlier life. Even as his hair turned white and his steps slowed, his mind remained curious and active. He turned his attention to finding a domestic source of rubber, testing thousands of plants for their potential. This project, like so many others, demonstrated his belief in the value of persistent effort. As we breathe deeply and allow ourselves to sink further into relaxation, we might appreciate how Edison's life reminds us that creativity has no age limit. Thomas Edison passed from this world on October 18, 1931, leaving behind a legacy of innovation that continues to touch our lives. In a beautiful tribute, people around the nation dimmed their lights at the moment of his funeral, a gesture of gratitude for the man who had helped illuminate their homes and lives. As we drift toward sleep, we might imagine those countless bulbs being dimmed, a wave of gentle darkness flowing across the country in honor of the man who had given so much light. Edison's life reminds us that the journey of discovery unfolds one day at a time, one experiment after another, with patience and persistence. Like the slow process of falling asleep, where we gradually release the thoughts and tensions of the day, Edison's work shows us that meaningful progress often comes not in sudden leaps, but in gentle, consistent effort as our breathing becomes deeper and our thoughts grow quieter. We carry with us the soft glow of Edison's legacy, illuminating our dreams with the warm light of human ingenuity and perseverance. The calming story continues as we gently examine what happened next in this remarkable journey. In his later years, Edison continued to work with the same patient dedication that had characterized his earlier life, even as his hair turned white and his steps slowed. His mind remained curious and active. He turned his attention to finding a domestic source of rubber, testing thousands of plants for their potential. This project, like so many others, demonstrated his belief in the value of persistent effort. As we breathe deeply and allow ourselves to sink further into relaxation, we might appreciate how Edison's life reminds us that creativity has no age limit. The gentle passing of time brought Thomas Edison into his 70s with a softened but undiminished enthusiasm for discovery. His laboratories in West Orange, New Jersey, became a place of unhurried contemplation and steady experimentation. The rubber project occupied much of his attention during these twilight years, as he sought to free America from dependence on foreign rubber supplies. With methodical care, Edison and his team examined over 17,000 plant species, eventually identifying goldenrod as a promising source. Picture the aging inventor moving slowly among rows of plants, his weathered hands carefully examining leaves and stems, his eyes still bright with curiosity beneath his bushy white eyebrows. The rhythm of Edison's later work had a soothing quality to it. No longer driven by the frenetic pace of his younger years, he allowed himself to savor the process of discovery. His days began early, often with the soft golden light of dawn streaming through his laboratory windows. He would settle into his favorite chair, a worn leather seat that had molded itself to his form over decades, and review notes from the previous day's experiments. His breathing was slower now, his movements more deliberate, but his mind continued to wander down unexplored pathways of thought. Edison's relationship with his collaborators deepened during these gentle final years. Young scientists and engineers would gather around him, their voices hushed in respect, as he shared stories from his long career. His laughter, when it came, was warm and genuine, rippling through the laboratory like a comfortable wave. He became not just an inventor, but a mentor, passing along not only technical knowledge, but also his philosophy of patient persistence. These words would hang in the air, settling slowly into the minds of his listeners like seeds finding fertile soil. As the seasons turned and the calendar pages flipped unhurriedly toward the late 1920s, Edison's health began to gradually decline. Yet even as his body weakened, his creative spirit remained resilient. He continued to visit his laboratory whenever his strength allowed, sometimes simply sitting quietly among his inventions. Like old friends keeping him company. The familiar sense of the laboratory, warm metal, paper, and the faint tang of chemicals provided comfort to him, a sensory reminder of a life well lived in pursuit of knowledge. The world around Edison was changing rapidly. Radio had become commonplace in American homes. Automobiles were transforming transportation, and moving pictures, an industry he had helped create, were now shown with synchronized sound. Edison watched these developments with a mixture of wonder and satisfaction, knowing that many of these innovations had roots in his own work. There is something deeply comforting in seeing how one's contributions continue to grow and evolve, like watching the gentle spreading of ripples from a stone dropped into still water. In 1928, Edison received the Congressional Gold Medal for his contributions to human welfare. The ceremony was quiet and dignified, much like the man himself had become. He accepted the honor with humble gratitude, his voice barely audible as he thanked those who had supported his work throughout the decades. The medal rested heavily in his hands, hands that had built, shaped, and created so much, a tangible symbol of a nation's appreciation. Edison's relationship with his family grew increasingly precious to him as the sands in his hourglass continued their gentle descent. His second wife, Mina, provided unwavering support, creating a peaceful home environment where he could rest between his periods of work. His children and grandchildren would visit, filling the house with soft laughter and the patter of small feet. Edison would watch them with a serene smile, seeing in their curious eyes and nimble minds the same spark that had guided him throughout his life. As the Great Depression cast its long shadow across America, Edison's optimism remained a beacon of hope. He believed firmly that innovation and hard work would eventually lift the nation from its economic troubles. In interviews given during this period, his voice carried a soothing reassurance that better days would come again. These words, spoken without hurry or worry, carried the weight of a man who had seen the nation weather many storms throughout his long life. The final project to occupy Edison's thoughts was perhaps his most reflective. He began compiling notes for an autobiography, wanting to share not just his inventions, but the philosophy that had guided his work. Each evening, as twilight painted the sky in gentle purples and blues, he would dictate memories to a secretary or to Mina. His voice would grow softer as the evening progressed, his words flowing like a peaceful stream, carrying the treasures of a lifetime's experiences. Though this work remained unfinished at his passing, the fragments that survive provide a window into the soul of a man who valued simplicity, perseverance, and wonder. Edison's health continued its gradual decline throughout 1931. Summer faded into autumn, and the leaves around his New Jersey home turned to warm golds and reds, then drifted slowly to the ground. As his strength diminished, Edison spent more time in quiet contemplation, often sitting by a window watching birds visit the feeders in his garden. His breathing became more labored, but his mind remained clear, like a still pond reflecting the sky above. He spoke less frequently, but with greater purpose, each word chosen with care and delivered without haste. On October 18, 1931, as the world was wrapped in the quiet embrace of night, Thomas Alva Edison took his final breath at his home in West Orange. He was 84 years old. The news spread across the nation and around the world with a hushed reverence. President Herbert Hoover asked Americans to dim their lights on the evening of Edison's funeral, a fitting tribute to the man who had helped illuminate the modern world. For 1 minute, millions of people paused in their evening activities as electric lights were lowered, creating a wave of gentle darkness that acknowledged the passing of a gentle light. Edison's funeral was attended by many of the century's most prominent figures, including Henry Ford, who had been a close friend for many years. Ford had collected the last breath of Edison in a test tube, a curious but touching gesture that spoke to the deep impact Edison had made on those who knew him well. As Edison was laid to rest, autumn leaves drifted down in a soft, natural benediction, returning to the earth just as this great man was returning to the elements from which all life emerges. The legacy Edison left behind continues to envelop our world like a comfortable blanket. Every time we turn on a light switch, listen to recorded music, or watch a film, we are touching the edges of his vast contribution. His 1,093 patents represent not just inventions, but doorways to new possibilities, each one opened through patient, methodical exploration. The modern research laboratory, a place where teams of scientists and engineers collaborate on solving problems, evolved from the Model Edison created at Menlo Park and West Orange. This approach to innovation has become so fundamental to our progress that we hardly notice it, like the gentle background hum of electricity that powers our homes. Edison's impact on how we experience the world is profound, yet often overlooked in our daily lives. The ability to record and play back sound, first demonstrated with his phonograph in 1877, transformed our relationship with music and the human voice. Before Edison, music was ephemeral, existing only in the moment it was performed. After Edison, melodies and voices could be captured and preserved, allowing us to experience them again and again, like returning to a favorite dream. This gift of permanence to something as fleeting as sound was perhaps one of his most poetic contributions. The motion picture industry, which now soothes and stimulates millions of minds each day, owes its existence to Edison's early experiments with his kinetoscope. Though he did not envision the full potential of cinema as an art form, he created the technological foundation upon which others would build. From those first flickering images of simple movements has grown an entire world of visual storytelling that helps us process our emotions, understand different perspectives, and sometimes simply escape into restful fantasy. Edison's approach to innovation continues to influence how we think about creativity and problem solving. His emphasis on trial and error, the willingness to try thousands of materials before finding the right one for a light bulb filament, reminds us that failure is not an endpoint, but simply a step in the journey toward success. This perspective offers comfort in our own moments of doubt or disappointment, encouraging us to continue with gentle persistence rather than giving up when our first attempts don't succeed. The research laboratory at Menlo Park, often called the Invention Factory, established a model for collaborative creativity that continues to shape our approach to innovation. Edison understood that bringing together minds with different types of expertise could create a fertile environment for new ideas to emerge and grow. This insight has blossomed into the research and development departments that exist in companies and universities around the world, places where knowledge can flow freely between individuals like a gentle current carrying nutrients through a healthy ecosystem. Edison's relationship with electricity fundamentally altered human experience of day and night. Before the widespread adoption of electric lighting, our activities were largely governed by the natural rhythms of sunlight. Edison's practical electric light system gradually released us from these constraints, allowing us to choose when to be active and when to rest. There is something profoundly soothing in this gift of choice, the ability to extend a pleasant evening with friends, to read comfortably in bed, or to move through our homes at night without the hazards of candles or oil lamps. The quality of Edison's fame was different from many of his contemporaries. He became known not just for what he created, but for how he created the patient, methodical approach to solving problems that made innovation seem accessible rather than mysterious. Children growing up in the early 20th century were encouraged to follow Edison's example, to experiment and observe the world around them with curious attention. His name became synonymous with the idea that extraordinary achievements come from ordinary beginnings through extraordinary persistence. As decades have passed since Edison's departure from this world, his contributions have become so deeply woven into the fabric of modern life that we seldom pause to consider their origin. The technologies he pioneered have evolved far beyond what he might have imagined, yet they retain the essence of his vision: to make life more comfortable, more connected, and more illuminated in both literal and figurative senses. His legacy continues to unfold like a slowly opening flower, revealing new petals of influence with each generation. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of Edison's legacy is not any single invention, but the spirit of possibility he embodied. He demonstrated that with curiosity, persistence, and methodical effort, the unknown could become known, the impossible could become possible. This gentle optimism This faith in human capacity to understand and shape our world remains a soothing counterbalance to the anxieties and uncertainties that sometimes trouble our thoughts as we lie awake at night. As we drift toward sleep, we might imagine Edison in his later years, sitting quietly in his garden as evening approaches. His face is lined with age, his white hair catching the last golden rays of sunlight. His eyes still hold that spark of curiosity, even as his body has slowed. He watches as, one by one, lights begin to glow in neighboring windows, each one a small testament to his life's work. The air is cool and still, filled with the soft chirping of crickets and the distant sound of a phonograph playing somewhere down the street. Edison smiles, content in knowing that his efforts have helped shape this peaceful moment, and countless others like it, in ways both seen and unseen. And as darkness gently embraces the world, the lights he helped create continue to shine, guiding humanity forward with their steady, comforting glow. Allow yourself to sink deeper into comfort as we explore the next phase of this soothing biography. As the evening shadows lengthen across the landscape of history, we find ourselves reflecting on the remarkable journey of Thomas Edison, whose life flickered out in 1931, yet whose light continues to illuminate our world in countless ways. The gentle passage of time has transformed Edison from a man into something more ethereal, a symbol of human ingenuity and perseverance that transcends the boundaries of his own era. In the quiet hours when sleep beckons, there is something deeply comforting about contemplating Edison's legacy. Like a warm blanket on a cool evening, his contributions wrap around our daily lives, so familiar now that we scarcely notice their presence. The soft glow of electric light that keeps the darkness at bay, the recorded music that soothes our troubled minds, the moving images that transport us to other worlds. All these began, in some form, with the patient work of Edison's hands and the curious wanderings of his mind. As you rest your head upon your pillow tonight, perhaps you might take a moment to notice the gentle click of a light switch, that most mundane of modern miracles. In that simple action lies the echo of Edison's most celebrated achievement, the practical electric light that transformed human existence. Before Edison, darkness claimed dominion over much of human life. After him, night became an option rather than an imperative, a choice rather than a constraint. Edison's path was never illuminated by sudden flashes of brilliance alone. Rather, it was lit by the steady, unwavering flame of persistence. There is a lullaby of reassurance in these words, a gentle reminder that our own setbacks are not endpoints, but merely waypoints on longer journeys. In the soft hours before sleep claims us, we might find comfort in Edison's approach to creativity. His famous invention factory at Menlo Park, New Jersey, was not a place of frantic energy, but of methodical exploration. Edison understood that innovation requires both inspiration and perspiration, both dreaming and doing. His laboratories were places where ideas could breathe and grow, where failure was not feared, but embraced as a necessary step toward success. As your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to drift, consider how Edison's influence flows like a gentle stream through the landscape of modern life. The films that tell our stories, the recorded music that expresses our emotions, the batteries that power our portable devices. All these trace their lineage back to Edison's workshops. Even the very process of organized research and development that drives technological progress today bears the imprint of his methodical approach to innovation. Edison's relationship with sleep itself was complex and fascinating. He was known to require very little sleep, often working through the night when an idea captured his imagination. Yet, he also mastered the art of the brief restorative nap, sometimes dozing in a chair with a metal ball in his hand. As sleep approached, his fingers would relax, dropping the ball to the floor with a clatter that would awaken him. His mind refreshed and ready to continue its explorations. Perhaps there is wisdom in this balance. The recognition that rest is not the enemy of productivity, but its essential partner. The passage of decades has softened some of the sharper edges of Edison's legacy. History now acknowledges the contributions of those who worked alongside him. The countless minds that contributed to what were often presented as solitary achievements. This more nuanced understanding does not diminish Edison, but humanizes him, transforming him from an unreachable icon into a more relatable figure. A man of extraordinary gifts who nonetheless relied on collaboration and community. In our drowsy contemplation, we might also find meaning in Edison's relationship with nature. Despite his focus on technological innovation, he maintained a deep appreciation for the natural world. In his later years, he worked to develop a domestic source of rubber, experimenting with thousands of plants in search of a viable alternative to imported materials. This blend of technological vision and environmental awareness feels particularly relevant in our own time. A gentle reminder that progress need not come at the expense of our connection to the natural world. Edison's friendship with other great minds of his era, figures like Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone, reminds us of the value of intellectual companionship. These men, titans of American industry, would sometimes escape together on camping trips, sitting around evening fires to share ideas and dreams beneath star-filled skies. There is something deeply soothing in this image, a reminder that even the most dedicated innovators need moments of quiet connection and contemplation. As your eyelids grow heavier, consider how Edison's legacy continues to evolve in unexpected ways. The phonograph that he created to record sound has transformed through generations of technology into the digital music that might be playing softly beside you now. The motion pictures he helped pioneer have evolved into the streaming content that entertains and informs us. His work on batteries continues in the research that powers electric vehicles and renewable energy storage, like ripples spreading outward from a stone dropped in still water. His influence continues to expand in ever-widening circles. Edison's later years were marked by both acclaim and setbacks. The business empire he built faced challenges from newer technologies and competitors. Yet through it all, he maintained his essential curiosity, working on new projects well into his 80s. There is a gentle lesson here about the nature of life's seasons, a reminder that purpose and meaning need not diminish with age, that the creative spirit can remain vibrant even as physical energies wane. In museums across America, Edison's inventions rest in quiet dignity behind glass, simultaneously antique and timeless. Children gaze with wonder at the original phonographs and early light bulbs, connecting across time with the spirit of innovation they represent. In schools, young minds learn of Edison's perseverance, absorbing not just the facts of his achievements, but the more essential lesson of his methodology. That patient, systematic exploration can unveil the mysteries of our world as sleep begins to embrace you in its gentle arms. Imagine Edison in the autumn of his life, sitting on the porch of his Florida winter home, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors no electric light could match. His mind, even then, was likely turning over some new problem, some fresh possibility. Yet, there must have been moments of quiet satisfaction too, moments when he simply observed the world he had helped to transform. Content in knowing that millions of lives were brighter because of his efforts. The true measure of Edison's legacy lies not just in what he created, but in what he inspired others to create. Each new innovation that builds upon his work, each fresh discovery that employs his methods, each young mind that awakens to the possibilities of science and technology. These are the living embodiments of his influence, more lasting than any monument of stone or bronze. As you drift toward the peaceful shores of sleep, may you carry with you the gentle inspiration of Edison's example. May your dreams be illuminated by the same curiosity that drove his lifelong exploration. May you find comfort in knowing that the human spirit's capacity for wonder and creation continues undiminished across the generations. And may you awaken tomorrow refreshed and renewed, ready to observe your world with the same patient attention that allowed one man to see possibilities where others saw only darkness. Sleep well, dream deeply, and rest in the soft glow of a legacy that continues to light our way forward.